Hey scrollers, welcome back to part 2 of the Intarsia Seashell series. In part 1 we laid out the pattern and traced out our first piece. I picked some wood to use to apply the pattern to, as you can see right here. We'll go ahead and get the pattern down, cut it out, and we're ready to go. So without further ado, let's get to work. Now that we have our initial piece of our pattern cut out, it's time to get it ready to apply to the wood. But before we do that, we need to spend a little time thinking about the pattern as a whole and what type of wood we're going to use. This is a very simple pattern, so wood choices are not going to be that difficult. Basically, the variables behind your wood choices are, first and foremost, what you have on hand and the size of what you have on hand. Are you going to use scrap or are you going to use fresh wood to do it with? Those are all personal decisions that you'll need to make. For this pattern, I want it to look as closely as possible to a natural seashell. So this wood here, I've decided to use butternut and sycamore because of the varying grains and the lightness of the wood. It'll give it a more natural seashore look to it. The lips, I'm using zebra wood because it's got a nice thick, heavy, darker grain, and I think that'll look good going vertically along the lip. It'll help highlight the inside of the shell, which I'm going to do in red cedar because it gives you that pinkish little look in there. You can sand it down and make it nice and shiny, and it'll look like the inside of an actual shell. Okay, here I have a piece of butternut. It's a nice grainy wood. It actually does have holes. I didn't put those holes in there. They're not actually drill holes or anything like that, or pinholes. That's some sort of bug got in there, but the bug seems to be long dead, and this is how I received the wood, so we're going to go with that. And I know this is butternut because I wrote it on there, so otherwise I'd forget and have no clue what this piece of wood was. Anyway, we'll go ahead and look at we'll grab our little piece of pattern here and we'll look at this first piece of this first segment that we're going to be cutting. This is the biggest piece. It's farthest away from the end, so it's going to have a wider grain here. You want the grain to be wider. You don't want a real tight grain here. It wouldn't look right. So you want the tighter grains down further, closer to the end. So for this piece, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to match up a nice wide, not super grainy piece there, and I think we can find that on here. So right in this area here, the grain pattern isn't real super tight. It's not real dark. It's kind of light, what I'm looking for. I've got my arrow of the grain direction, so I know what I'm looking for. So we'll just get a general idea here, and that looks pretty good. You can still see the grain through the tracing paper, even though you guys might not be able to see that real well. So now that I know I've got a basic idea where I want my pattern to go, we'll go ahead and prep the wood and apply the pattern. As with any scroll saw pattern, you want some sort of tape on it to help lubricate the blade, keep the blade sharp, and keep the wood from burning. Intarsia is no different, so we're just going to, well, that's kind of noisy, but we'll deal with it. We'll apply the pattern here, rip it off. After applying the tape, I always like to take a little plastic squeegee. Anything will work. You could even use a thin piece of Baltic birch, 1/8 inch Baltic birch works well. A credit card, even though I wouldn't suggest using credit cards on this. You can use pretty much anything just to smooth it out real good. For spraying all my scroll saw patterns, I made this simple little box. It's made out of leftover hardwood that I had from a flooring project and a piece of melamine. It's approximately 16 inches square, and the sides are about 2.5 inches high. And to protect the melamine from getting all gooey from the glue, I just put some wax paper down. When the wax paper gets all cruddy, then I just simply pull it up and put a new piece down. Here's our pattern. I put it down upside down, and my hand, I probably need to replace the wax paper. It's getting a little sticky. But anyway, I just give it a quick little spray, and voila, we're done. As you can see, I went ahead and applied the pattern to the piece of butternut. The butternut is 3/4 inches thick, and we finally gotten to a point where we can actually make some sawdust. I'm using a FDUR number 3, which is Flying Dutchman Ultra Reverse Blade, due to the fact that butternut is pretty soft. It's still a hardwood, but it's soft enough to use a small blade on. I prefer using the smallest blade I can on anything I cut. That's basically just a personal preference. As you can hear, I've got a nice good tension on my blade so that my blade won't wobble or squiggle as I'm cutting. The way I cut Intarsia, there's basically two types of cuts, a critical and a non-critical. When we get to part 3 and we start putting the second piece together with this piece, I'll explain that a little bit better. But this is basically all non-critical cuts, so you don't have to be super careful. You just want to get close to your line as you possibly can, but stay on the outside of the line. You don't want to cut on the inside of the line. That'll really create problems later on. If you cut just to the outside of the line, you can always sand down if you have any issues here and there later on. So let's get cutting. It's going to get noisy, and I'm going to speed the film up, so enjoy the little musical interlude. And there we have it. Now that we've got our first piece cut, in part 3 we'll go over the benefits of tracing patterns as opposed to printing multiple copies of the same pattern. I will also explain critical and non-critical cuts. Then we'll go ahead and cut out piece number 2. Thanks for stopping by, and don't forget to click that little like button down there. And as always, happy scrolling.